About a month ago, it all began. My dad's sister, my aunt, called to inform me that his health was deteriorating. He had been struggling with cardiac issues for some time, and his condition was becoming worse. My stomach twisted when I heard that. I had always been close to my dad. We remained close even after he and Mom divorced when I was 12. We always found time for phone calls, weekends, and holidays. Mom was, well, Mom. Although we had our times together, Dad always understood me more than Mom ever did. I knew I had to go be with him when I heard he was having difficulties. Mom wasn't really happy. She had remarried to Greg a few years prior, and they were involved in their own affairs. However, this was Dad. I decided to remain as long as necessary, so I packed my bags and went to his apartment. He vanished less than a week later. Severe cardiac attack. As simple as that. As an only child at 19, I was abruptly put in charge of organizing my father's funeral. I had the uncanny feeling that I was witnessing someone else's life. I called my mother first thing in the morning. Even though they hadn't exactly been exchanging Christmas greetings, she still deserved to know. But how did she respond? Freezing. Flatly. "I heard you the first time, Noah," she stated. "What do you want me to do about it?" Take action? Sharp and unpleasant, the words hung there. I just hung up because I was so stunned. Look, I understand. She had moved on after their divorce. However, this was my father. Could she not even act as though she cared? Something like, "I'm sorry for your loss," would have sufficed. I didn't have time to think about it, though. A funeral needed to be planned, family members needed to be contacted, and a ton of paperwork needed to be completed. I was attempting to maintain my composure while operating on autopilot. Then the shocking news arrived. I received a call from Mrs. Peterson, my next-door neighbor, whose daughter Sarah and I were essentially reared together. She must have heard about Dad and wanted to send her sympathies, I assumed. Not at all. She continued, "Noah," with a perplexed tone, "why didn't you tell us you were moving out?" Moving out? I had no idea what it meant. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm not moving out. I'm coming back home as soon as I can." She dropped it at that point. Mom had been telling everyone that I had made the decision to live away from home. She had also been hard tidying my room while I was gone dealing with Dad's passing. I'm selling my belongings, discarding it. My guitar, my books. Dad purchased me the old-fashioned record player for my 16th birthday. Lost. It was like a kick to the stomach. She was preparing space for Ethan and Mia, Greg's children. My belongings and memories were thrown away like trash to make room for them. I was filled with rage. I quickly dialed Mom's telephone after hanging up with Mrs. Peterson. I let loose before she had a chance to greet me. "How dare you sell my things? Those were my memories of Dad." "How did I find out?" she muttered, attempting to backpedal. But I persisted. At last, she acknowledged it. "Greg and the kids need space, Noah. They deserve to make this house their home." "Their home?" I virtually screamed. "It was my home first, and I was coming back." Sharing the area wasn't the point. Even though Greg had a separate narrative, I still liked Ethan and Mia. However, it felt betraying to remove me from my room and to empty it while I was in mourning, as if she was using my father's passing as a pretext to get rid of me as well. I trembled as I said, "What you did is unforgivable," to her. "The least you can do is give me the money from the stuff you sold." That's when she struck the last blow. I already spent it, Noah, on new things for Ethan and Mia. For my step-siblings, my memories and my childhood were transformed into brand-new, glittering toys. She was also aware that I would be heading out to college in a few months. In any case, I would have brought the most of those items along. She seemed to have torn out and trampled on my heart, out of mind and out of sight. Apparently, outside the house as well. However, Mom had made a grave mistake. She assumed I would simply roll over and accept it. She was mistaken, completely incorrect. The funeral went by quickly. It felt unreal to see Dad in that coffin, as if he were about to sit up and order me to stop being so depressed. However, he didn't, and I was left with a persistent hollow ache in my chest. Joe, my uncle, and I then proceeded to Dad's apartment to organize his belongings. Bills and other crucial paperwork were what we were searching for. That's when we discovered it. Dad's will was nearly concealed amid his documents in a tiny fireproof box. I was taken aback. I never thought Dad was the will-making kind. He consistently maintained that family concerns, not formal paperwork, should be handled with understanding and trust. But it was there, as obvious as day. Uncle Joe clarified that in order to prevent any issues, Dad had drafted it after the divorce. He had instructed Joe to take care of everything when the time came. And what's inside that will? One more shocking revelation. After the divorce, Dad had never given Mom the house. His name was still on it. He had left everything to me. My mind whirled. Mom had been living in a house she didn't own all this time, and she didn't even realize it. And it was mine now. Initially, I considered remaining silent. Perhaps we might reach a consensus and work something out. All bets were off, though, following Mom's antics with my possessions. God bless Uncle Joe. He saved my life. He assisted me in navigating the legal system by connecting me with real estate brokers, attorneys, and other professionals. I even began searching apartment listings for Mom and her new family, not for myself. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally made my way home. I braced myself for the conflict. Uncle Joe accompanied me as I entered, prepared for anything Mom would throw at me. Her expression of disbelief was priceless. She must have assumed I would be begging for pardon and asking to stay. No. Noah, she cried with a phony sense of worry. Why have you brought a lawyer with you? Are you going to sue me? Greg simply grinned while relaxing in his seat as if he owned the room. He obviously believed I had no power. I requested that Mom take a seat. We need to talk, I continued, attempting to maintain a calm tone. Nobody expressed regret, not one of them at all. I therefore laid it out. Mom, I said, do you remember the details of your divorce from Dad? She appeared perplexed, perhaps unsure of my intentions. Then I revealed the secret. Uncle Joe placed the property papers on the table after taking them out. Mom and Greg scanned the papers, the blood draining from their faces. I own this house, I declared. The quiet was overwhelming. Then everything went haywire. Mom lost it. This is unfair, she exclaimed. I was his wife. I deserve a share of this property, Greg added, panic taking the place of his arrogance. We have nowhere else to go. This is unjust. Ever the composed one, Uncle Joe attempted to defuse the issue. He clarified, this isn't about taking away someone's house. It's about recognizing Noah's legal rights. He recommended that we come up with a solution, perhaps even paying Mom for the item she had sold. Mom, however, wouldn't have it. She accused me of attempting to punish her for moving on and of being cold and unappreciative. She even threatened to file a lawsuit against me. I simply sat there and watched the program. Finally, years of suppressed annoyance and biting my tongue to maintain harmony were erupting. I said, go ahead, in a fairly steady voice. Waste your time and money. We both know how this will end. I explained that I would not be unreasonable. The house belonged to me, but they could have time to locate somewhere else. They also intended to depart. Eventually. Greg chose to escalate the situation right when I felt the drama had reached its climax. I briefly believed he had finally conceded defeat when he bounded out of the room. Again, incorrect. With Ethan and Mia in tow, he stormed back in. The poor children, who obviously had no idea what was going on, looked scared. You're not just evicting us, Greg growled, gesturing to his kids. You're taking away a home from innocent kids. Is that what you want? For a brief period, his attempt to portray me as the bad guy nearly succeeded. I paused. Was I really any better than Mom for kicking these kids out of the only house they had ever known? Uncle Joe noticed the uncertainty in my eyes. Naomi, he urged gently, don't fall for their manipulation. We'll find a solution that's fair to everyone. And we did. At least no one was being expelled right away. Thinking they had won, Mom and Greg virtually collapsed with relief. I even raised a hand as Mom attempted to embrace me. This was not the end of it. I said, you can stay, while maintaining eye contact with her, but you'll pay rent, fair market rate, and we'll sign an agreement to make it official. There was an immediate change in the room. Anger replaced relief. Greg appeared on the verge of exploding, and Mom's face twisted. Mom said, I'm not paying rent to live in my own home. Calmly, "It's not your home anymore," I stated. "And considering you tried to sell all my stuff and kick me out, I think rent is more than fair." Uncle Joe intervened once more, saying that this was a kind offer. It would guarantee that Mia and Ethan could also remain in the house. It appeared for a brief instant that they might see sense after all. Then Greg went crazy. Claiming to be the one responsible for everything, he pushed Uncle Joe. Things rapidly got out of hand. Mom tried to hold Greg while I hurried to help Uncle Joe up. In the corner, Ethan and Mia were crouching, their eyes wide with terror. Uncle Joe threatened to call the cops and took out his phone. When the police finally arrived, they took statements and issued a severe warning to Greg. He gave me a nasty look as he was walking away, muttered, "This isn't over. I established the law one final time when everything had calmed down." Greg was no longer welcome, but Mom and the children could stay. There would be no exceptions to the rent starting next month. Later, I took Ethan and Mia aside as well. I genuinely said to them, "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. No matter what happens, you'll always have a place to stay if you need it." So there we were. I owned the house. Greg wasn't there. I was getting the silent treatment from Mom, which was actually a good thing, and I found myself questioning whether I'd made the correct decision. I was in the clear legally. However, morality was a different matter entirely. There was tension in the days following the altercation. Mom alternated between dramatic guilt trips and cold stillness. She would scream, "After all I've done for you, after I carried you for 9 months," it was hard. Fortunately, Greg was missing. For once, he had listened to the police when they ordered him to cool off somewhere else. I suppose small mercies, but Uncle Joe, what a saint that man was. He was always checking in to see how I was doing. Greg shoved him, which made me feel terrible, but he dismissed it. His smile was comforting. "That's what family's for, Noah," he added. To determine a reasonable rental fee and have the house evaluated, we met with a real estate agent. As it happened, I had no idea how much the home was worth. I never thought I would need it, but it was a crash lesson in market rates and property prices. Naturally, Mom objected to the figure. She sneered, "This house can't possibly be worth that much." Considering the size and location, the agent gently pointed out that it was actually less than market value. We also began Greg's eviction procedure. We have reasons to file right away because of his aggressive reaction. Naturally, Mom attempted to resist it, weeping, begging, everything, but I didn't back down. He was acting in an inappropriate manner, and I didn't feel secure in the house with him. Although it was difficult to watch her lose it, I kept reminding myself of all the things that had brought her to this moment. Fortunately, Ethan and Mia began spending more time with me. We were all feeling disoriented and perplexed, and I believe that we found solace in each other's company. I made an effort to explain things to them in a way that they could comprehend and to be as honest as possible about what was going on. We discussed their emotions, concerns, and even their remorse about Mom selling my belongings. As it happened, they had actually been able to salvage some of my belongings, including an old watch that Dad had given me and a few other little items that Mom was about to discard. A lump formed in my throat at the sight of those familiar goods. I also instructed them to notify Mom or me right away if Greg attempted to get in touch with them or showed up at the house. Whatever was going on in his mind, I was going to shield them from it. Thus, things were moving forward. I was beginning to feel like I was regaining control, but it was still a lot to bear. There was still much work to be done, including reestablishing trust, family therapy, which I was seriously considering, and legal matters. But I had optimism for the first time since Dad passed away. Then there was another twist, one I didn't anticipate. It seems like life likes to surprise you with unexpected turns. The phone rang when I was in the kitchen, attempting, and failing badly, to understand Dad's old chili recipe. I didn't recognize the name displayed by caller ID, Jennifer Miller. With hesitation, I replied, "Hello?" The voice of a lady said, "Hi, is this Noah? My name is Jennifer. I used to be married to Greg." The mother of Ethan and Mia. I couldn't speak. She must have heard about the whole house scenario because news spreads quickly in a small community. She asked if we could get together for coffee or anything. I agreed, curiosity piqued. We got together in a small downtown cafe. She started off with some small conversation before getting right to the point, and I was astounded by what she told me. She claimed, "Greg has been skimping on child support payments for years," in a furious tone. "He's been using the excuse that he's helping support your household to justify not paying what he owes." My mouth fell open. Is there another layer to this mess? Greg had apparently been playing the system to make it appear that his contributions to our household were sufficient to meet his responsibilities to his children. He was actually ignoring his obligations. Jennifer had a suspicion that Greg was trying to evade those payments by insisting on keeping Ethan and Mia with him. He could claim that he was providing for them directly by housing them with him, which would lessen or possibly completely erase the amount he owed her. Greg's actions suddenly made a lot more sense. It was about money, not about family harmony or ease. He was putting his personal financial interests ahead of his kids' welfare, and he was doing it through my mother. Jennifer then inquired as to whether I would be prepared to testify in court regarding the living arrangement. She needed someone to verify Greg's financial contributions, or lack thereof, were accurate. I consented, even though it felt like a big duty. Mia and Ethan deserved the assistance to which they were lawfully entitled, and I'd be happy to help reveal Greg's lies if I could. Everything altered because of this new information. In addition to being threatened with eviction, Greg might also face severe legal repercussions for unpaid child support. Penalties, including jail time. It's no surprise he disappeared. I mentioned Jennifer's call to Mom. She was first in denial. She insisted Greg would never do that, but her face lost color as I went over the specifics. She appeared to be lost, betrayed. I felt a twinge of sorrow, even though I hadn't forgiven her for everything that had transpired. In this case as well, she was duped by a man she believed she could trust. However, empathy may only go so far. She had made her decisions after all, and now she had to deal with the fallout. It felt even more uncertain with Greg's possible legal issues hanging over them. However, I also sensed, I suppose, justice. His deceit and manipulation would not go unpunished. If I could avoid it, I wouldn't. I was caught in the center of a complex web that was the entire affair. However, I was no longer alone. Even in unexpected areas, I had allies. And for myself, Ethan and Mia, and my father's memory, I was resolved to finish this. Home life was an odd combination of unexpected tenderness and subdued stress. Mom was generally keeping to herself, with sporadic outbursts of guilt or rage interspersed with the silent treatment. I was learning how to read her emotions, to foresee the storms, and to seek cover when necessary. The unexpected consolation, however, came from Ethan and Mia. We spoke, played games, and simply hung together for hours. They were still absorbing all that had happened, feeling both relieved that Greg was no longer there and scared and confused. I tried my hardest to support them and provide a calm presence amidst the confusion. Even family dinners with just the three of us were resumed. There was a gentle intimacy that felt pleasant, even though it wasn't the same as the evenings with Dad. We were settling into a new routine and rhythm. Ethan and Mia's mother, Jennifer, paid them a few visits. Everyone was emotional when they saw her children after a lengthy absence. There were hugs, tears, and a lot of catching up. Her love for them and her longing for them were evident. Being able to assist in arranging their reunion felt nice. It served as a reminder that love and connection could still be found despite the chaos. However, the storm clouds had not quite dissipated. The prospect of legal action hovered over us while we awaited the official eviction notice to be issued to Greg. I kept checking my mail, anticipating the next court summons or legal document. Then that happened one afternoon. Greg arrived at the residence. Ethan and Mia and I were working on their homework in the living room when we heard a knock on the door. My throat tightened with my heart. Before I even glanced out the window, I knew who it was. Mom's voice called from the kitchen, "Noah, it's Greg. What should we do?" I became quite protective of Ethan and Mia. I said, "Get them upstairs," in a strong tone, "and lock the door." I inhaled deeply before answering the door. Greg was standing on the porch, looking angry and unkempt, growling. "We need to talk," he said. I tried to seem calm as I said, "There's nothing to talk about. You're not welcome here." I resisted his attempt to shove past me. When I said, "I'm not going to let you hurt anyone," I was taken aback by how powerful my voice was. His face twisted in anger as he glared at me. He didn't try to push his way in, though. He was aware of my seriousness. He hissed, "You're going to regret this. You and your whole family." He turned and left after that. With my heart racing, I leaned against the door and closed it. I had turned my back on him. I was the quiet child who always wanted to stay out of trouble. I had discovered my voice, and it felt strong. I was shaken by the incident, but I was also oddly excited. I had defended my family and confronted a bully. Although it was a minor triumph, it was an important one. A few days later, the eviction notice was formally served. Greg did not argue. He was aware of his defeat, and he likely had more pressing issues to deal with than the prospect of being sued for unpaid child support. Though it was a new routine, life gradually began to return to its old one. The rage had faded to a peaceful grief, but Mom was still far away. Ethan and Mia were doing well, and each visit strengthened their bond with their mother. And me? In this new family dynamic, I was discovering a power and responsibility I was unaware I possessed. It was a new type of home, but it felt like home again. It was a house based on perseverance, overcoming hardship, and finding fortitude in unlikely places. I at last felt like I belonged in that house. The weeks that followed were filled with court appointments, therapy sessions, and legal paperwork. It was strangely freeing but exhausting. I felt as like I was regaining control of my life with each step, letting go of years' worth of repressed feelings and unsaid realities. I began attending family therapy with Mom. It was difficult and occasionally unpleasant, but it was also essential. After years of misunderstandings and unfulfilled desires, we were at last ready to discuss the hurt, the animosity, and the openness. We were both trying, but it wasn't easy, and we began to mend our friendship gently, very slowly. It was important to comprehend the past, draw lessons from it, and figure out how to go forward rather than to ignore it. We had both made mistakes and had flaws. However, we were also mother and son, bound together by a connection that was unbreakable in spite of everything. Mia and Ethan were also doing well. They were spending more time with their mother, and I felt so happy when I saw the happiness in their eyes when they spoke of her. They were recovering, developing, and discovering their own trajectories. And me? I was getting ready to start a new chapter in my life, college. I felt a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and little fear. However, I was also prepared. I had overcome obstacles I never believed I could overcome, and had found a strength I was unaware I had. I was prepared to take on the world and leave my imprint. The home, our home, was a sanctuary. It was full of gentle chatter and laughter, the sound of Ethan and Mia playing in the backyard, and the cozy aroma of Mom's cooking. Even if the love there was occasionally complex and messy, it was a household full of love. I remember sitting on the porch with Mom one evening as the sun was going down, and we watched the fireflies dance in the twilight. For a while, we were silent and content with the silence. Mom finally murmured, "I'm sorry, Noah," in a quiet voice, "for everything." I gave her a serious look and could see the remorse in her eyes. "I know, Mom," I addressed her. "I'm sorry too." We continued to sit in quiet as the burden of the past subsided and was replaced with a shaky hope for the future. We had been pushed to the edge by a challenge that life had thrown at us. However, we would emerge stronger and more robust. We had regained our power, our voices, and our path back to one another. The house served as a reminder of that trip and a monument to the strength of family, especially in the face of its unorthodoxy and imperfections. It served as a reminder that there is always hope and the potential for recovery and rejuvenation, even in the most dire circumstances. And I knew that Dad would be pleased as I gazed out at the fireflies that were flashing. He would be pleased with the man I was growing into, the family we were starting, and the love that held us all together in spite of everything. Story 2. 10 years ago, my universe broke all around me. Families were trying to survive, companies were failing, and the Great Recession was wreaking havoc at the moment. My wife Karen and I had 2 amazing children, Mike, a 9-year-old, and Sarah, a 12-year-old. We had a good life, managed a little family company, and resided in Texas. But the financial crisis really hit us hard, and our company was unable to survive. I was carrying the weight of the planet. I had to figure out how to keep our heads above water and support our family. I felt as though I had to grab the chance for work abroad in Dubai without option. It was a chance to repair and safeguard our financial future. The toughest choice I have ever made was to be apart from my family. Sitting down with Karen, I explained the circumstances and reassured her that this was the only way we could start to get back on our feet. She seemed to grasp, but I could not quite make out what fluttered in her eyes. I discounted it as concern about the distance and the relocation. Promising Karen and the children I would see every 6 months, I packed my luggage and flew to Dubai, aching heart. Once things were steady, my intention was to establish myself there, make enough money, and finally go home. Though I was sad about leaving, I kept reminding myself that it was for them, and that as a husband and parent, I was doing the right thing. The first several months were a haze. Dubai was quite another planet with a different way of life and culture. I threw myself into work, developing relationships, and gradually picked up momentum. Still, the loneliness was too great. Night after night, coming home to an empty apartment wore me. I missed my family dearly, and the idea of seeing them once again one day kept me going. Every 6 months, I maintained my word and traveled back home, attempting to maximize my time with Karen and the children. Still, it was not the same. As Sarah and Mike were growing up, I thought I was missing out on their life. Karen seemed aloof, and I first thought of this as the result of her alone managing all the tension. I gave her space since I wanted to spare her more work. Every time I came back, the wall separating us appeared to get more robust. Especially after I had settled comfortably in Dubai, I advised they relocate with me. Karen, though, showed no interest. She insisted the children's academic performance was good and wanted not to disturb their way of life. I wondered whether there was more to her hesitation. I mentioned the possibility of Karen joining me once the children completed high school and began college in Houston. With the kids grown and following their own paths, it seemed like the ideal moment. She rejected the concept once more, though, this time pointing to her mother's health as justification. She showed no enthusiasm when I even volunteered to bring her mother along. By now, my head was blaring with warning bells. Having done all I could to create a life for us in Dubai, I was eager to have my family back. Karen, though, seemed reluctant, almost as though she wanted nothing at all to be with me. Telling myself she needed more time or was terrified of change, I tried to justify her actions. Deeply, though, I sensed something wasn't right. Hope and expectation permeated my last visit before things really started to go apart. I had chosen to close my company in Dubai and return permanently to Texas. Closing the distance would bring Karen and me back together as a family, thereby addressing all of our issues. Her response, when I told her my strategy, was far from what I had anticipated. She appeared agitated, even offended. She asked why I would toss away all the effort I had put into starting a life in Dubai. I startled myself. The idea of me returning home and of us at last being together once more excites her. Rather, it seemed as though she wanted me nowhere at all. That's when the first strands of uncertainty started to slink into my consciousness. It was my mother's as much as Karen's response. She phoned me, reflecting Karen's feelings, advising me not to hurry back and to give closing my company some thought. I figured Karen had probably spoken to my mother since I hadn't told anyone about my plans. They seemed to be plotting against me, aimed at keeping me away. Though I attempted to discount my doubts, the discomfort persisted. I chose to put off my return, but I couldn't get rid of the sense that something was wrong. Though she hardly ever did, I would purposefully go days without phoning Karen, expecting she would reach out. Our talks turned short and surface-oriented, lacking any actual connection. I gently broached the topic, asking Karen whether she felt something was off between us. She seemed cheerful. She would always discount it, though, reassuring me that everything was good. It felt terrible. We seemed to be strangers living different lives. Following that last visit, Karen and I drifted dramatically apart. All the minor questions I had suppressed seemed to be suddenly enlarged and difficult to overlook. Though I expected things to seem regular every time I got home, they never did. I felt like a guest visiting my own house, an alien. I hardly spoke, and Karen hardly either. I would text her, and her reply would take hours, occasionally days. Our conversations came out as surface-level banter. She never spoke of herself. She would tell me about her mother or the children. I couldn't figure out why she seemed to be keeping me at arm's distance. To see whether she would notice or care, I began gently testing the waters by not getting in touch with her for an entire day. She hardly did most of the time. Days stretched into weeks, and our correspondence reduced to nearly nothing. Every time I tried to close the gulf separating us, she would accuse me of being overly analytical and neurotic. Unable to stand the ambiguity anymore one night, I asked her point blank whether she still wanted to be with me. Rather than providing comfort, she grew defensive, and her answer lacked any conviction. Karen's increased phone protection caught me off guard as well. She used to toss it around without thinking twice, but nowadays she wouldn't allow it out of her view. Should her phone ring even during video conferences, she would fabricate an excuse to switch off the camera or cut off the connection quickly. She seemed to me to be hiding something. I observed during a quick visit home that she would always keep her phone face down or carry it with her even when momentarily leaving the room. She brushed it off when I asked her about it, charging me with paranoia. Her answer felt empty, though, and my stomach grew more uncomfortable. Reminding myself of the years we had spent together, the trust we had developed, I tried to reason with myself. But I could not ignore the indicators anymore. They were all there. We were physically apart as well as emotionally. She seemed frigid and aloof even though I attempted to be loving, hugging, and kissing her. She seemed to be performing the motions devoid of any real feeling. My mother started behaving oddly about the same time. She would contact me out of the blue, provide unwelcome advice, and encourage me to concentrate on my business in Dubai and not worry about matters back home. She was reading from the same script as Karen, as though they were in cahoots. After a demanding day in Dubai, one night I was by myself in my apartment battling my doubts and worries. Though it felt like Karen and my mother were pushing me away, I wanted to think they were simply worried about me. I even began to consider the likelihood Karen had discovered someone else. Then, though, I would feel ashamed for even considering such ideas. I could feel the uncertainty chewing me. I began dissecting everything Karen said and did, looking for hints that would either support or refute my misgivings. She was careful, too careful, though, and each time I expressed worries she would discount them or shift the focus. One especially noteworthy occurrence stayed with me. Karen was in the kitchen while I sat on the couch browsing my phone. Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it right away. She looked up at me instead of reading the message, though, as if looking to see whether I had noticed. She quickly put her phone away and returned to cooking when she discovered I was observing. In my tummy, a knot developed. Something didn't feel right. Our space apart kept widening. At night, I would lie awake wondering whether I was the one responsible, if my absence was generating this conflict. I would then remind myself, though, that I was acting for Karen and the children. I was trying to guarantee their future and meet their needs. But none of that seemed to count now. I felt alone, caught in a limbo in which I could not travel back, but neither forward either. Every time I considered going back to Texas, I would hear Karen's voice in my brain reminding me I was rushing things. I would consider my mother's cautions and doubt myself. Eventually, I chose to stay in Dubai a bit longer in order to concentrate on my work. But my heart had moved elsewhere. I performed the motions, but the uncertainty kept chewing at the rear of my consciousness. The sense that something was quite wrong persisted with me. Suspicion's weight started to be intolerable. Eating me alive was the distance, the uncertainty, the continuous sensation that something was wrong. Every day seemed like I was bearing a mountain on my shoulders, and the more I tried to throw it off, the more the weight grew. I realized I could not live with the ambiguity anymore. One way or another, I had to learn what was happening. I didn't tell anyone, but I reserved a flight back to Texas. Not even the children, not Karen, not my mother either. I figured it would be wonderful if I was mistaken. If correct, at least I would know for sure. Worse than everything else was the not knowing. Anxiety attacked me when I arrived in Texas. My head spun with all the possibilities, all the objects I may come across. Early in the morning, I showed up at the house and let myself in with the extra key. The home was silent, and for a little period I considered perhaps I had overreacted. Perhaps Karen was simply worried or weary, and I had overblown things. But I noticed odd little things as I moved about the house. Usually keeping her phone charger near the bed, Karen's clothes were neatly arranged on the couch rather than in the bedroom, and her phone charger was hooked into the kitchen socket. Though little, it was enough to make me tense. I tried to cool down, but every stride I made seemed like I was approaching something I wasn't ready to confront. Then I heard footfall from the kitchen. Turning the bend, I found Karen standing there, horror clearly imprinted on her face. Her response provided all the necessary validation. She stopped momentarily before forcing a smile that missed her eyes. "Oh, you're home early," she remarked, attempting to present it as though she were glad to see me. Still, I sensed the conflict in her attitude. She asked me why I hadn't notified her I was coming and how long I intended to stay. She questioned everything. She seemed to be trying to figure out her remaining time for covering her traces. I dismissed it, but I sensed something was off. I watched her intently over the following few days. Though I attempted to behave normally, I studied her every motion. She was still behaving oddly with her phone, always keeping it close and constantly checking it when she felt I wasn't looking. She seemed to be hiding who she was chatting with or waiting for a message. Anymore, I couldn't ignore it. I have to find out what was happening. I so began spying, something I never would have considered doing. I would check her phone during her shower or sleep. Still, it was locked, and nothing seemed out of line. Nothing. Not even missed calls or messages. She had seemed to have cleaned everything. Though I felt stupid, it strengthened my will to find the truth. One evening, Karen was out running errands when I decided to go one step further. She has a GPS tracker in her vehicle. Though I understood it was an extreme action, I needed explanations. The continual uncertainty would not be livable. The first several times I followed her, everything seemed normal. She might see her mother, do grocery shopping, or get items from the drugstore. Then one day, though, I noticed her heading to a tiny hardware store across town. I had never seen her go there during my trips. It was a location I had never heard her reference before. I waited, wondering whether she might be simply gathering supplies. She stayed there, nonetheless, for a protracted period. Driving over, I parked a few blocks away and observed from a distance. The store appeared closed with dark lights, but Karen's automobile was parked front of house. After a while, the owner of the store emerged to survey the area as though looking for someone watching. Then he closed the shutters, Karen still inside. My pulse dropped. Though I felt I was onto something, I wanted more evidence. A few days later, I returned, following her, and the same pattern emerged. She visited the hardware store, and the proprietor closed business as soon as she entered. I stayed longer this time, observing what might transpire. Though I felt furious within, I had to be cool. Should I challenge them without strong evidence, she would simply lie or offer apologies. A few days later, I decided to venture forward. Pretending I had spotted it while driving by, I questioned Karen about the shop casually. She paused and then claimed she was assisting her mother with a home improvement job. She said it so naturally that I nearly came to believe her. But she gave up something in her eyes. She seemed to be awaiting my purchase of her story. I nodded and matched her, but I knew she was lying. The second time I followed her, I parked much nearer. I watched her get out of her car and meet the proprietor of the store outdoors. After a little conversation, I noticed him encircling her with an arm. It was more than simply a kind gesture. The way he drew her near suggested they were more than pals. My blood swirled. Though I pushed myself to wait, I wanted to face them right then and there. I got out of my car and headed toward the shop once they entered, and he closed the shutters. Several times I knocked on the door, but no one answered. Inside, I could hear movement, like they were scrambling. It required all I had not to knock down the door. Feeling more conflicted than ever, I back off, inhale deeply, and go. Part of me yearned to keep searching, to uncover all. But another side of me yearned not to know. The truth that Karen, the woman I had relied on for so long, was turning on me was something I wanted none of. Still, I had to know the truth, even if it meant facing my deepest anxieties. I followed Karen assiduously for several days. Her schedule was going out in the afternoons, occasionally to her mother's, sometimes conducting errands. I trailed each time she left. Though I had to catch her in a falsehood to have such indisputable evidence, it was taxing. It felt like waiting for a breaking storm. Though I felt something was about to happen, I had no idea how damaging it would be. The waiting was torturous. Now it seemed like I was simply giving Karen more time to cover her tracks. All those times I had advised myself to be patient, to play it wisely. I had to act not too long later. I watched her move in search of a pattern. One day then, everything lined up. She exited the house and the tracker pointed me exactly to the same hardware store. I parked a block away, close enough to see, but far enough not to be obvious. Watching her come up, get out of her car, and stroll toward the store made my heart hammer. The owner greeted her, and they quickly looked at each other before entering. He closed business with Karen inside by lowering the shutters as usual. That was it. With hands shaking with a mix of rage and fury, I stepped out of my car and headed inside the shop. I gave the door great force. Silence. I gave another bang, louder this time. At last, the owner cracked open the door. He seemed startled, as though he expected no guests at all. Trying to keep my voice level, I questioned, "Where's Karen?" But the fury was bubbling inside me. He stopped, his eyes flying around. That was just what I needed. I opened the door and moved in. The store was dimly lit, and most of the shelves were tarps covered. The place appeared to not be even open for business. Following the sounds coming from the rear, I rushed down the aisles. My heart pounded, every stride weighty compared to the next. Then I discovered her. There in the storeroom with the owner was Karen. She had a look that combined remorse with shock. She had been seized. Time seems to stop still. The owner tried to move between us, but I pushed him aside. All I had suspected, all the misgivings I had suppressed, came tumbling down on me. With a shaky voice, "How long, Karen?" I said. "How long have you been living this?" She fumbled trying to make words, but nothing came out. Things went fast as the owner grabbed my arm. He tried to drag me out of the storeroom while we shoved one another. Though it all felt like a haze, Karen screamed for us to stop. I got the owner off and landed a punch, pushing him back. At last, Karen moved between us, ordering the owner back off. We could talk about it later at home, so tears flowed down her cheeks as she asked me to go. I was leaving with answers, though. I insisted, "Why, Karen?" "Where long?" she said. "It's not what you think," begging. Once more, "How long?" I yelled. "A few years," she said, her voice scarcely audible. "But it means nothing at all." 4 years. The words strike me as a physical blow. She was standing there behaving as though it were no big deal, as though our marriage had not entirely collapsed. "A few years," I said more to myself than to her. "You simply kept lying to me all this time." Saying she had been lonely and that it was difficult with me gone for so long, she sought to explain. One excuses one another after another. Not one bit mattered. She had decided to lie rather than tell me straightforwardly. I glanced at the owner, who wore a haughty expression. "You have to leave," I said, my voice low and lethal. "This rests between my wife and me." He hesitated, but I stepped forward to make it abundantly evident he wasn't welcome. At last he turned around, mumbled something under his breath, and went. I pushed away when Karen tried to grab for my hand. I said, "Don't. Just don't." She began to cry once more and begged me to take her home so we might talk. Still, I wasn't in the right frame for conversation. There was no going back. My world had just crumbled. "You had years to tell me the truth," I pointed out. "You chose him instead of years to repair this." She stood there sobbing, and I sensed all I had created fall apart with her. Broken all the trust, all the love. I told her I couldn't be around her right now and I needed space. She tried to object, but I stopped listening. I drove straight to my mother's house after leaving that store without turning around. My head kept whirling. I needed answers, and perhaps my mother would have if Karen wasn't going to provide them to me. I started right away when I got to her house. I charged, "You knew, didn't you?" Though I could see the shame in her eyes, my mother tried to seem surprised. "Don't lie to me," I said. "You were aware of Karen's adultery." She sat there clearly feeling guilty. Saying she felt it would ruin everything, she began to cry, and that she wanted not to tell me. "You think this doesn't hurt?" I said back. "Keeping it from me? Pretending everything was fine? How is that any better?" I couldn't let my mother reach for my hand as she apologized. I turned away, experiencing once again betrayal. not just with Karen but also with my own family. I felt as though I no longer knew whom to believe. Before she could say anything else, I left, telling her I had to be alone. I needed time to sort through everything, to decide what to do going forward. My family had lied to me. My marriage was disintegrating. I felt disoriented and as though all I knew had been snatched away. For hours I drove, my head a whirlpool of emotions. How ought I to handle this? Years of infidelity on my part by my wife. My own mother had known and said nothing. My whole life seemed to have been inverted. I ended up parking near a tiny park from which we used to get the children when they were young. Feeling as though I was caught in a dream, I sat there gazing far away. Part of me yearned to return to the house, face Karen once more, yell and demand responses. But another side of me felt depleted, as though I no longer had the will for it. I remained in a cheap motel for the following several days. I told no one where I was. I wanted time to consider my next action. Calling and texting nonstop, Karen begged me to come back so we could talk. I ignored her, though. She botched it and had her chance to be truthful. I was not ready to hear more of her justifications. Trying to reach out as well, my mother left voicemails expressing concern for me and apologies. But every time I heard her voice, all I could remember was how she had looked me in the eye and lied, acting as though everything was good when she knew the reality. I was alone and lost. My confidence had been destroyed, and I had nowhere to turn. Years of constructing a life for my family had meant giving everything up for them. And this was their return to me, lying and betrayed. I decided at that same instant I had finished. Done with Karen, with my mother, done with all the lies and dishonesty. I would turn around all and start afresh. Though it would not be simple, I would find a way to reconstruct my life and rediscover pleasure. I checked out of the accommodation, packed a few things, and drove to the airport. I got a one-way ticket for Dubai. It was time to shut that chapter of my life and open a new one. I peered out the window at the fading Texas scene as the jet lifted off. Though a flood of melancholy swept over me, I also felt release. I was leaving behind the shattered fragments of my former existence, the suffering and treachery. Though it was a future I would live on my own terms, I was flying toward one that was unknown,